3 statistical secrets that you need to know heading into the Austria Grand Prix. Welcome to the Pit Wall, your stop for fantasy Formula 1 content. You can like and subscribe for more content like this. It's so good to be back, and let's go. The first statistical secret is dynamic pricing. I'm going to share with you the story of 2 different teams. On the one hand, we have Ferrari, and on the other hand, we have AlphaTauri. Let's kick it over to the Google spreadsheet. The link will be in the description so you can pore over these charts, these statistics, and come to your own conclusions. But let's compare these 2 teams. First team, Ferrari, has been going through 2 major stages in which they get a lot of value and then they slump for a race or 2 and then they lose a bunch of value. Overall, though, we see a trend that Sainz has been more consistent ever since Monaco. I might call it the burn of Monaco because Leclerc should have gotten a huge amount of points and did not start that race. Ever since then, Sainz has been able to keep pace with Leclerc. Both are sitting at a 1.1 points per million. But because Sainz is cheaper than Leclerc, you would want to have that 3 million in reserve to pick up other drivers. You can see how Leclerc has been dipping in sentiment. He might be able to turn it around in free practice session 3, and that's the next section. I'll dive into why Ferrari might be a potential option, but Sainz has continued to keep his high sentiment. Our second team is AlphaTauri. We see that despite Gasly's DNF, the community has been favorable towards him in sentiment, and he could potentially get a bunch of points this coming race like he should have last race if it wasn't for that lap 1 contact. Tsunoda, on the other hand, has surprised enough people that his sentiment has gone in the positive for the first time since the 2nd race of the season. So Tsunoda has a potential of a higher ceiling, and if you want him as a money pick, could turn out to be a points pick as well. Stay tuned for our third statistical secret. It all comes down to how is the Honda engine going to be favored in this race. The discussion of engines and aero packages brings us to our second statistical secret, the track. This is the 2nd year that we are having a doubleheader at the Red Bull Ring in Austria. One race is called the Styrian Grand Prix and one is called the Austrian Grand Prix. The practice sessions this week have been colder than last week. The cooler the temperature on the track, the more favorable it is towards Mercedes engines, which is why we're seeing Mercedes and Aston Martin being able to be quite high on their practice session 1 and 2. So you want to stay tuned. Does that carry on to practice 3? 2 teams to look out for is Ferrari. Why I mentioned them in our previous section is because they have found a way to improve their aero package and are now faster on the straights. Not only were they able to pass a lot of cars last race, they could potentially do that again this race. And so they would be 2 drivers that you would want to consider. Aston Martin also has an increased power output. Shout out to Peter Windsor. He pointed out that the Mercedes high speed was 309 kilometers per hour, which is 192 miles per hour. The Red Bull is a 311 kilometers per hour, which is 193 miles per hour. So that's just a 1 mile per hour difference. But the Aston Martin is at 196 miles per hour, clocking in at 316 kilometers per hour. That is a 5 kilometer gain, a 3 mile per hour gain. And that means that the Aston Martin, if they keep it when they go into Parc Fermé before qualifying, if they keep that engine mode, they could have an advantage when they're trying to pass other cars during the race. During free practice 2, we had spotty rain, and Red Bull on the radio told Verstappen to stay out and get a feel for the conditions because that mixed conditions could prepare him for what might happen on Sunday. And back to Peter Windsor, he pointed out something very clever. This is during the spotty rain period, which was roughly 10 minutes. The fastest lap times during that period was Hamilton, followed by Leclerc, and then Alonso. Surprised that Alonso would be so fast in those mixed conditions. So if there's mixed conditions possible on race day, you might want to look at Leclerc at 17.6 million or Alonso at 14.8 million as a potential sub-in. Now recognize that just because weather is forecasted for rain does not mean you're going to get it. And if we get another dry race, the results are going to be very similar to last race, with the exception of a softer tire compound, which might allow for a 2-stop strategy. which now brings us full circle back to Aston Martin. Aston Martin's strategy the entire season has been long first stints, which allows them to have fresher tires in the second half, but they've been trying to do one-stop strategies. If Aston Martin is able to pull off a one-stop strategy compared to the other teams, they might be able to hold on to positions or even do great overcuts to other teams. So keep an eye out for Aston Martin and how their strategy will play out if we don't get mixed conditions. And now for the third statistical secret, the drivers. Let us begin with my top pick, and that will be Gasly. Gasly is the only driver eligible for a streak this coming race, and that is a quality streak. Yes, that is plus 5 points, but if you had him last week and you ended up with negative 5 points by keeping Gasly, you could potentially offset that and be back to gaining points with Gasly. Not only does he have that streak, let's look at the Google spreadsheet to see how valuable Gasly is potentially for your team. Despite a DNF, Gasly is still ranked number 5 in points per million. He's at 1.2. Now, if you think that Ferrari is going to come in strong again, the closest Ferrari driver to Gasly would be Sainz, and then you would have to decide, do I want Sainz or do I want Gasly? Here's the trade-off. Sainz is 14.3 million. He is more expensive than Norris by 0.3 million and more expensive than Gasly, who weighs in at 11.9 million. When you look at Sainz and Gasly, only 7 points separate them for the entire season. This is why Gasly has been my top pick, even though Sainz has been quite consistent. Mick Schumacher is towering over everyone else around him at 72 points. Why it may still be good to hold on to a back marker like Mick Schumacher is because in 3 races between last year and this season, there have been 12 retirements. That's an average of 4 retirements per race, which means that if you're Mick Schumacher, yes, you may qualify low, but if you are gaining 8 points just off people DNFing, that is going to continue to keep him as a valued commodity. It's now time for my picks. I have 2 teams I've been running this season. Team 1 is my steady team. Team 2 is my day trading team, where I try to get the value as high as possible. Let's look at the value differences. Team 2 is a 106.2 versus Team 1, which is a 104.4. So through day trading, I've been able to get 2 million more. And that is where the difference comes between these 2 lineups. There's only one driver difference, Tsunoda or Schumacher. Now, as I said earlier, Schumacher falls in the top 5 when it comes to points per million. But there comes a point where you should be able to afford a higher tier driver so that those points per million is gaining you more points. If Schumacher's points per million was 1, that means if he costs 5.8 million, he should give you 5.8 points. But let's say Tsunoda's points per million was 1, then that means he should get 8.5 points per race. What I'm trying to do is use my extra capital to be able to afford a higher tier driver. Even though Schumacher is very consistent, I want to get someone who is just as consistent, just getting more points on average per race. Do I want Tsunoda or do I want Raikkonen? You will see that Raikkonen and Tsunoda are right next to each other. There's a 0.8 million difference between these 2 drivers. So it would seem like a logical step if I could afford Raikkonen to pick him up. But over the course of this practice session, Tsunoda has been faster. This is on the spreadsheet so you can see. It's called track times. You can compare the 4 races, well, the 3 that we've had and the one that's happening between 2020 and 2021. The reason why there is a gap in 2020 is because there was a rain cancellation for free practice 3. But if you come down here and we're looking at Raikkonen, that Raikkonen's highest position during the whole race weekend last week was 11th, but that came during the race, which meant that he had good race pace and strategy. Tsunoda, on the other hand, second lowest was 10th. Actually, in free practice session 3, he peaked at 5, as well as free practice session 1. If we look at this race weekend, we see that Raikkonen surprised by being 6th fastest in free practice session 1, 14th fastest in free practice session 2. It seems like a drop, but the colder temperatures and the spotty weather. But we look at Tsunoda, 5th and 6th. If Tsunoda is able to keep his trajectory, not only will he be able to be a better choice this race, but he might raise in sentiment. But if Raikkonen suddenly pushes things around and it seems like he's back up fast to where he was in the top 10, he would probably be the one I would want to go with. But that's a toss-up that I have to go with, either Raikkonen or Tsunoda. And there you have it, 3 statistical secrets for the Austria Grand Prix. And until next time, I'll see you on the pit wall.